Hello and welcome to our first revision program on financial operations. Well, one of the subjects under cima. Well, today what I intend to basically do is take you through a couple of very brief and important areas. The first one, of course, being exactly what our paper contains, the paper structure, the syllabus content, together with a few comments from the examiners on previous exam diets. So we know exactly what we should be doing and what we should stay away from as far as our examinations are concerned. Well, initially looking at the financial operations syllabus in itself, it's split into three broad areas. The first one is on business taxation. Represents about 25% of your syllabus, and it is an area which the examiners have started focusing on quite a bit, with probably the last few past papers indicating that the first few questions under the paper focuses on tax, together with quite a bit of theory behind it. So relatively important area, something which is being examined quite heavily. The second part of the syllabus is on regulation, ethics of financial reporting, 15% of the syllabus, not a very hot topic among students. One of the main reasons being it's completely theory, and being typical Asian students, we like to stay away from theory, which is not recommended in this case, because you're guaranteed to get 15 marks worth of theory questions here, and they're quite easy to score out of. The final part of the syllabus, which is on financial accounting and reporting, 60% of the syllabus. This is where the examiner focuses on the standards, the financial statements, your consolidated accounts, and surprisingly, this is an area which students tend to like because it involves quite a few numbers. Okay, so three broad aspects in terms of our syllabus, and looking at our paper, the paper is divided into three very clear-cut sections. The division of the paper is identical across the level. So all operational level papers have the same structure. Section A is a 20-mark chunk of the paper, which is completely objective test questions. It's a mixture of 2, 3, and 4-mark questions. Could involve a few numbers, could involve a few discursive questions, so a little bit of theory. The second part of the paper is section B, which is worth 30 marks. That's 6 questions, 5 marks each. And again, it's a nice mix where you've probably got about 2 to 3 questions which are almost completely theory, and the others involve a few numbers. Finally, section C, 2 25-mark questions, again, primarily calculation based, but could involve a bit of theory. So something which I've been mentioning right throughout is every single section could involve theory. So students who come into the paper thinking, well, I'm just going to focus on the numbers, should be sufficient for me to pass. You're talking about roughly 35 to 40% of theory in this paper. So unless you're hoping to score 50 out of about 60, 65 marks, you really have to attempt the theory as well. Well, let's quickly go on and take a look at some of the comments which the examiners have made over the last few sessions. Just focusing on the slide, these are direct comments made by the examiners themselves and exactly what areas they feel that students need to focus on and improve. Disappointing performance for all diets, lack of detailed knowledge or understanding in some areas, poor exam techniques, which is something the examiners tend to, well, go on about every single session. After every single paper, they seem to complain about bad exam techniques. Few incomplete scripts, which is an absolute crime. You're given 3 hours and 20 minutes to finish the paper, and some students don't complete the paper. Many candidates did not attempt parts of some questions, particularly discursive parts of the 25-mark questions. These are the students who go in with the mindset that we can get through the paper purely by looking at the numbers, which is not very true. Areas for improvement which have been specifically laid out by the examiner: computational questions, layout of answers. We all love numbers, but when it does involve a few workings, most students tend to put their workings all over the place. You have a complete page full of workings and the answer is hidden somewhere within the workings, and it's up to the marker to figure out what the right answer is or what the final answer is. Terrible approach to go by. You need to have a flow to the answer and very clearly labeling out, well, this is my final answer. Failure to show workings. Well, some students in fact prefer doing all the calculations on their calculators, and you ask them, where are the workings? Well, common answer is, they're in my head. The examiner cannot read your mind, nor does the examiner see your head. So you really need to put down those workings, because every single step of the way, markers are given instructions to give you credit. So even if your final answer is incorrect, there's a very high chance you will score a major part of the marks, provided you've shown your workings. So workings are extremely important, regardless of the section that you're attempting, be it section A, B or C. Show your workings very, very clearly, because every step of the way, markers have been instructed to give you credit. Not reading the question properly. By now, I'm sure all of you have attempted so many questions in class or on your own, that the moment you go into the exam, you see a question which looks fairly similar to the one that you've attempted, you start rattling out the answer to the question you've attempted at home or in class. Students do not read the question carefully. Common complaint made by the examiner is students are answering a question they think is there, not the question I asked them. Well, an example I could just raise is a standard which probably has been looked at quite a bit is IAS 38, intangible assets. And if the examiner does ask for, well, treatment of development costs, a common answer that I've seen is students start with what research seems to be, the different categories of research, that you cannot capitalize it, and then finally move on to development, whereas the question specifically asks for development costs. So ensure that you've read the question carefully and write to the point. Okay. Other areas which the examiner specifically points out focuses on the discursive questions, which most students either leave out or attempt, well, not very seriously. Looking at our slide, we'll see that answering a different question is a common mistake. Not applying the correct verb. CIMA is very, very specific. They give us 5 different levels of verbs. You are expected to know which level of verb is being tested, and CIMA does everything possible to ensure that you identify the verb. The verb at your exam will be given in bold. I don't think it can be made any clearer. So watch out for the verb. It will tell you exactly how much to write. Since this is a common question raised by students, well, how much do we write for a particular question? Do I need to write half a page? Do I write a page? Well, that is something which I will very quickly take you through the moment we're done with looking at exactly what the examiner seemed to complain about. Making general rather than specific points, well, do not regurgitate theory you've learnt in class. You need to apply it to your scenario. Brief scenarios given to you at the exam, answers need to use the knowledge that you've got and apply it to the scenario. If you do not apply it to the scenario, you stand a chance of losing at least 50% of the marks. Poor time management. Well, again, something which students just do not manage. They look at a question, there can be certain difficult parts in the question, or let's just say they're not as straightforward as the others. They read the question once, they get stuck, they read it a few more times, spend a good 10-15 minutes on it, they get depressed, they just don't move on to the next question or the next requirement. Even if it is a 25-mark statement of comprehensive income, statement of financial position question, you cannot possibly lose 12.5 marks if you do not complete one adjustment. Chances are you're going to see 10 notes. Not answering one note properly is not going to lose you 12.5 marks. If you feel one particular adjustment is difficult, move on to the rest of it. You've still got quite a few marks to play around with. If students do not move on to the next few requirements, then they actually stand a chance of failing this exam. So time management is very, very important. If you're not sure of the answer to a particular question, move on. You've got quite a bit of the paper to complete. Once you're done with it, come back. Lack of knowledge in some areas. This usually stems from students trying to memorize. You see a particular question in class, you think, okay, this is what the answer has to be, textbook, you memorize, go to the exam, you see a similar question, you want to just put out the same answer. Doesn't work that way. You need to apply it to the scenario, you need to have understood exactly what the question requires from you. So these are common complaints which examiners tend to have, and it's useful for us to have an understanding of this because you can stay away from them at the exam. Try to ensure you do not make any of these mistakes or do not repeat any of these mistakes. These are things that examiners hate to see. Okay, key area, and it's an important aspect for, well, I believe all papers under CIMA, but I'm just targeting the few verbs which are likely for the operational level exams, and more specifically financial operations. We've got 5 levels of verbs, out of which 3 are examinable at the operational level. 3 different levels. The first one, well, less seen over the last session or two. It's on knowledge, and if we just zoom in on our slide, we'll see that we've got 3 different verbs there: list, state, define. Pretty clear cut. All 3 of the verbs simply say, give me a very, very brief set of points. Example would be list, make a list of. You're not required to write a paragraph on it, you're not required to write 2-3 sentences on it, just one complete sentence would do. Now, students love writing bullet points. At your exam, if you write a 1-word answer, it will not be marked. The expectation of a bullet point is 1 complete sentence, a collection of 6 to 7 words. So 1 sentence would be sufficient if you see any of the 3 verbs that we just saw here. Okay, that's list, state, or define, 1 complete sentence, and you'll get your marks. The second level of verbs, which you need to be aware of, again, zooming in on our slide, you'll see 5 different verbs here: describe, distinguish, explain, identify, and illustrate. Okay, 5 verbs given to you here. Now, the moment you see the words describe, explain, you need to write a little more than 1 sentence here. Maybe a couple of sentences. Use an example if you can. Apply it to the scenario that seems to be given to you. Now, a common verb you will see at your exam will be explain. Explanations are possible even through calculations. So do your calculations, use your answers, write a brief description. So key verbs for you to focus on at the exam. And finally, level 3, which is on application, which tends to involve quite a bit of our questions at this particular level. So few key verbs for us to focus on. We'll go in for a short break, and once we come back, we focus on level 3 of our verbs.